Good afternoon and welcome to the Georgia Tech Manufacturing Institute's Spring 22 Lunch and Learn Lecture Series. My name is Dr. Billy D. Brown, and I'm a Senior Research Faculty as well as EWD Director at Georgia Tech Manufacturing Institute, or GTMI. I'm excited to continue this lecture series in a new year here. It's a very informative series, and I'm hosting it along with our Strategic Partners Director, Paige Shee. I'm encouraged. I encourage you guys to, as the audience, to please spread the word about this series so we can continue to grow our audience and network, which provides value to our community and our stakeholders. Before I introduce today's speaker, I'll first introduce GTMI and just provide some brief instructions for the audience. So GTMI is one of 11 Georgia Tech interdisciplinary research institutes, or IRIs, that uniquely focuses on manufacturing research, development, and deployment. We help tackle the grand challenges of today's manufacturers and assist partners in moving innovations from the lab to the market. GTMI has a wide variety of facilities and equipment located on main campus for basic research, as well as on 14th Street nearby in our advanced manufacturing pilot facility that may soon become an AI manufacturing pilot facility. GTMI's mission includes education and workforce training, collaborative partnerships with industry, academia, and government, as well as thought leadership. GTMI hosts lunch and learn lectures each semester, starting at noon on Mondays. These sessions are excellent opportunities for Georgia Tech faculty, undergraduate students, graduate students, as well as researchers in a global manufacturing community to learn and share advanced manufacturing knowledge. To ensure a smooth presentation experience today, all audience members are currently muted. We will have a chat window. We have a chat window as well as a question and answer panel. You can use either of those to submit your questions. Please go ahead and submit your questions as soon as you have them formulated so that the speaker can address them at the end of the presentation. In addition, this semester we will have a survey. There's a survey link that my colleague is going to post in the chat window. So please, you can click on that link and you go ahead and open the window after she posts that link so that you'll have it open and you can complete the survey after the seminar has completed. All right, so today I'm pleased to introduce our guest speaker, Stephen Lustig, who will discuss Global Supply Chain 22 Challenges and Opportunities. Stephen is a strategic operations leader with a passion for developing people and leading continuous improvement throughout organizations. As VP of Global Supply Chains at East West Manufacturing, he is responsible for optimizing the company's worldwide spend and strategic relations with key suppliers. Past roles have included leadership positions in the area of supply chain, project management, manufacturing, and NPI. In these positions, Stephen has facilitated successful teams and projects involving employees, suppliers, and customers in the United States, Latin America, Asia, and Europe. Stephen has held positions at companies ranging from one of the largest in the world, Coca-Cola, through mid-sized companies, as a senior operations manager at LSI Corporation, all the way to a startup company as VP of Manufacturing and Supply Chain at Monster. So he's been involved with Coca-Cola's Freestyle drink dispenser as a manufacturing manager, as well as automated mixed cocktail machines at Monster. Stephen holds a BSME from MIT, an MSME from an M.B.A. from Georgia Tech, as well as project management professional and Six Sigma Green Belt certifications. In today's session, Stephen will discuss how 2021 was full of challenges in the supply chain across many, if not all, industries. A series of man-made and natural events combined to create shortages, delays, and price increases in a way that many in the field have never seen before. This has led many companies to reconsider their supply chain strategies, including where geographically to buy things, and from how many suppliers. We'll look at what caused these crises, what resulted, and what companies should consider in designing a more robust future supply chains. Stephen, you may begin your presentation.
Thank you, Billy D. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm very happy to be here sharing with you. Obviously, very critical in what we're seeing in the world today and very timely. So we will, what we're going to do today is we're going to look at what I call the current supply chain model, what we've seen for the last decade or so, and then lead into how that's been affected by what's happened in the last couple of years, in 2020 and 2021, and how that's really contributed to some of the challenges we're seeing. And after looking at all that, we'll see what companies are looking for in their supply chain now, what are some of those challenges with achieving that, and the opportunities as well. So as VP of Global Supply Chain at East West Manufacturing, I'll be focusing on a perspective that's similar to the supply chain we have, which is heavily focused on electronics, custom electronics manufacturing, if you think of the printed circuit board assemblies and what they go into, as well as custom mechanical parts, things like metals, plastics, rubber, motors, and all sorts of combinations thereof. And with facilities here and factories here in North America, Latin America, and Asia, who have that perspective as well. But please keep in mind that these challenges that we've seen over the last couple of years are really across different industries and all sorts of different supply chains, right? We're seeing these for computers and for gaming consoles, exercise equipment, but also very different industries. I have colleagues in the areas of home building, and so they've had similar supply chain developments for lumber and other building supplies, or even for things like furniture. So just keep that in mind as we go through this, that there's a broader context that we're looking at. I wanted to start I found this slide to be very interesting. It's a look at what global supply chains look like. And if you think it looks kind of like a mess, it really does, right? There's a lot of things, a lot of things being built in one place and shipped somewhere else, or in some cases being built in one continent or country, moved to another country for the next processes, and eventually getting to the end customer in a different country or continent. And so you can see that a lot of these lines are going from Asia to Europe or to North America, but there's other paths as well. And so it's really a lot of different transportation logistics going on. I think one thing that's very interesting is if you look at the legend here, you can see the industries, they vary quite a bit, right? It's electronics, but it's also clothing, pharmaceuticals, it's automobiles. So this whole variety of different products, you're still seeing that there's a lot of different and extended supply chains. I will give you an example that we have from our customer. We have a customer that we support out of our Raleigh facility. And because of their end customers, it's important that the end testing programming occurs in the United States. However, in order to satisfy them and their needs for optimal pricing, we're actually getting the plastics from our factory in Vietnam, and we're getting some of the other metal mechanical parts through our office in Shenzhen, China, and the partner factories there. That's a very typical type of supply chain for a lot of different industries right now. And so it's important to keep that in mind as we go through some of this discussion today. So what people have been looking for primarily is the lowest unit price. And often this may be the only consideration. So we've seen a number of times where people have done things like they conduct reverse auctions. So instead of you or I bidding on something like on eBay, and the price gets higher and higher, the reverse auction is where a customer or a company goes in and asks its suppliers to keep bidding lower until somebody wins the auction. And it's very difficult or more challenging to consider other factors like transportation, service levels, inventory programs, risks, when you're just going by something like that. Also, a number of supply chain and purchasing personnel may be evaluated and given raises, bonuses based on the cost savings they achieve. That's very often a primary metric that they have. That makes it a little more challenging to consider other things like service, or what I like to call total cost of ownership, which includes financials and risk, support, responsiveness, flexibility, logistics, and all of those things. Another aspect has been a focus on one or few sources for products. That's been changing a little bit over time, but the focus really has been on, limiting the number of sources because of the work involved. You may have tooling costs if you launch it up at a different facility. You have supply chain costs. You have engineering costs. If you need your engineering team to go and evaluate and approve a new supplier, that may be taking time away from new products that the company is looking for and that the engineering team is evaluated on. So we've seen some of this changing, and people are not so focused on one source, but it hasn't been as strong an effort as there could be to expand that. Another aspect is just in time. So, we can focus on companies like Toyota and other automotive companies, but across many industries, there's been a lot of focus by finance teams and management on maximizing your cash flows and also on reducing your inventory. And again, people are being rewarded and evaluated on this. So what this does is it means nobody really wants to be holding inventory. And sometimes companies can work with their suppliers to hold some inventory, hopefully nearby, sometimes not. And their suppliers also are being evaluated on minimizing inventory and improving their cash flow. So they're not really interested in that. Maybe they'll ask their suppliers to hold that. That gives us very little flexibility if things go wrong. If there's a shipment delay, if there's a quality issue, if there's an upside in demand, if the inventory is very lean, the ability to meet that becomes more challenging. And the last topic on the supply chain model that I'll talk about is that the distance really was not a big concern for a lot of industries. The idea was that if you could build it cheaper, back to our first topic here, if it's far away, you just place the orders a little bit earlier and the parts shipped by air or sea from a different continent and they get there. And the fact that it's far away from the customer, or from your end customers, and the risks involved in that transportation time, that transportation cost, or even the geopolitical risks from other continents and countries were things people thought about, but were not primary consideration. And so that's kind of what we were looking at. So the model, works really well when there is everything goes, according to plan. What happens, however, is if there's perturbations, you see that throughout the supply chain, either all the way up from a distant supplier way down in the chain up to an end customer, or vice versa if it's related to a demand increase. And so some of these risks, I think this is a familiar picture to many people. Anyone who went to a grocery store early 2020 is demand outstrips supply, and supply has problems increasing quickly enough. The inventory is depleted, what inventory there is, and it's hard to get that built up again. And while we see a grocery store here, we saw this with B2B businesses as well, industrial goods, customers having inventory running out and challenges keeping their production lines running. Another challenge occurs when there's a quality issue. So what happens if you get your boxes of product parts at your receiving inspection and they're wrong? It's the wrong part number, the wrong quantity. There's a defect in the part. You don't have much inventory and your supplier doesn't have much, hopefully correct inventory, then responding and adapting to that becomes more challenging. And again, you risk shorting your customers and running, idling your own production lines, which is financially good for neither of those companies. Transportation costs. So, if there's reliable cost of transportation and reliable time frames for transportation that you can put into your models, you can order and know it's going to come in, that's fine. And for many years that worked fairly well. There were some fluctuations, but not major. But when the demand for shipping across continents surged, the supply of ships did not suddenly increase. Obviously, those take a long time to build. And the supply of containers on those ships, as you see in this graphic, also did not suddenly change. So what happens if suddenly your customer comes and orders more things, and you're here in the U.S. and your parts are on a boat from Asia over on the Pacific Ocean? You can't call the boat and say, hey, row faster. Kind of a set time frame. The same point, what happens when that boat is stuck outside a port in California behind 30 other boats and it can't unload? So a shortage of ships, delays, and increased costs were things that were not really considered as a primary risk when looking at this. And now we've seen that has occurred. And last, I felt obligated to put a toilet paper photo on here. Obviously, I think we all know even if we didn't experience personally back in early 2020, the shortages related to that, again, real or perceived demand increases much faster than supply could adapt. I actually just read on Friday in the Wall Street Journal an article about another thing that some people may consider a necessity, liquor. So apparently some liquor companies are experiencing some supply and demand issues. So supply for liquor has gone up tremendously over the last couple of years, and in a number of states, liquor stores were considered essential, services and remained open, and people were using them. However, the supply did not adapt as quickly, and so now some of these liquor manufacturers are running into shortages of the ingredients, as well as in the bottling and other packaging. So we see this happening across industries. So what happened in the last couple of years? So very beginning of 2020, everything was okay. People were happy, just like the people that we see here in these photos from our factories. But pretty quickly, things changed. And obviously, that was COVID. So COVID was first announced as coming out from China, and that resulted in a number of factory closures there. Regulations required the factories to shut down for a number of weeks. It varied by industry, by region. It could be a couple of weeks. Some of them were a month or more. That was the first supply chain hitch. Now, we didn't necessarily see huge impacts from that. We got a little bit lucky, if you want to call it that, because of the timing. It was around the Lunar New Year when factories are normally closed. So most good supply chains had already planned for closures. They had some extra material, either in stock or on the water, over the ocean. And these factories also had some more time to get ready to start up again after Chinese New Year ended. It would have been a lot more, I think, damaging to the supply chain if it occurred some other time during the year. But there were still impacts to supply. Then we saw the spread to Europe, also to North America, and we saw a number of things. First of all, the surge in supply that we talked about earlier, especially for certain things. We also saw a decrease in demand for some things. So surge in demand for a number of different products. And then also we saw supply constraints. We saw automotive factories and even meat factories, shutting down for safety, which constrained their ability to meet the increasing demand. But that obviously flows its way through down the supply chain. And so the people making sub-assemblies for the automotive factories, then they weren't producing, and their suppliers making die-cast parts weren't producing. So we saw several different impacts here after things started really to get better in China. And so it kind of moved along. And so kind of worked through that early 2020, first half 2020, thought things were getting a little better. And we get into late 2020, really early first half of 2021, and we see impacts in Southeast Asia. My industry, while a lot of the for integrated circuits, the chips you use on circuit board assemblies for computers and other electronics, a lot of those, the fabrication is done in places like the TSMC foundry in Taiwan, but a lot of the final testing and packaging integration is done in factories in Malaysia and Philippines in Southeast Asia. And as the COVID virus spread there, and before they had access to vaccines, those governments, for safety reasons, regulated factories. Some factories had to close. Key export focused factories were able to stay open, but they had to reduce their workforce. The idea being not to have too many people nearby each other in the factories. Well, the reduced workforce created reduced output. And so while the demand at the time was either steady or strong, the supply was decreasing. And you can see this effect all the way through the supply chain. So an example I'll give you is our factory in Vietnam, where we make electronics and plastic injection molding. The Vietnamese government, probably middle part of this year, cases were rising, and they required that people could not go back and forth between the factory and anywhere else. They couldn't go home, they couldn't go out to eat. The rule was if you wanted to continue producing and working, you had to stay and live at the factory. So what this meant is for a portion of our workforce, they were able and willing to live at our factory, not just work, but eat, sleep, shower, do everything, and not leave and not see their family or friends for a couple of months. Really tremendous effort. Some other factories in Vietnam were able to do that, but some others were not equipped to do so. And so we saw kind of another kink in the supply chain occur, maybe after we had all thought that was done. So you might think that was enough, and it really was. It really did cause enough disruptions in the supply chain, but there was more beyond that. So I think many of you may remember about this time last year. This is in Texas, Austin area in particular, where they got snow and ice. This caused, in Texas, a lot of supply constraints for the petroleum industry. And that includes plastic, which uses oil as an ingredient. My industry, it caused an impact for the integrated circuits. The company Texas Instruments, which makes a lot of those, has places located, not surprisingly, in Texas, as do others. Austin's become a big hub for that. So that was another little challenge to the supply chain that we didn't really need. We also, in our industry, we had a factory in Japan, catch on fire, and they supply chips to a number of people. And so it's just one of those kind of random, unfortunate things, but it just added to the issues. I'm thinking everyone remembers this. This is the ship blocking the Suez Canal. If you think about the ships that were stuck waiting behind it, and you think about the ships that diverted around Southern Africa, taking a lot longer time to get to their sources, you can imagine the impact. But even more than that, it's these ships that they were supposed to be somewhere else picking some other products up, and they weren't. That caused shipping delays. It caused constraint in shipping capability for the ships, but also the containers. All these containers you see here and on the other ships weren't being used to move other things. So another challenge. Last, this is it's a little hard to see, but this is a view out of the West Coast. I think this is Long Beach, California. And you can see these dots are ships waiting to unload. And I know it's a little hard, but I think you can see that the 2021 picture, there's a lot more ships waiting than there were a year before. That has cleared up, fortunately, but that's a issue of labor shortages in different areas of the supply chain at the port, whether it's port workers or trucking or warehousing nearby. So all these contributed to the challenges we were already seeing. So the other issues occurred were price increases. Um, so this is an example. I'm going away from my industry here, but this is for lumber. And as you can see that it has gone up tremendously, probably 3 or 4 times at its peak. A colleague in the industry, and I remember during some of our meetings him talking about that, and the impact this had on home building prices as well as delays for them. And you can see, if you use a lot of lumber in the house and other building supplies, which were also going up in price, that impacts the overall price of the house and maybe the willingness of people to buy houses. Our industry, we saw something that, you can talk to people who've been in the industry for 3 or 4 decades, they'll say they've never seen this before, is instead of electronics component manufacturers saying, hey, there's a price increase coming, and when you place your future purchase orders, the price increase is going to take effect. They were saying, our costs are going up, our material costs are going up, our labor costs are going up. So we're passing on the price increase effective now, not for new purchase orders, but for the purchase orders you have with us already. And even for those purchase orders that we should have delivered to you already, but we're late on. So this was a new thing for our industry and really exacerbated some of the price issues we were seeing. The price wasn't just related to materials. We also saw price increases related to transportation and logistics. So this is the cost of transporting. This is freight rate across the Pacific. And you can see even during the early parts of COVID into the first half of 2020, the rates stayed pretty steady. But as we saw, a spike in demand, and as we saw some of those other supply constraints that we talked about, this price just skyrocketed. And you can see these prices got up to 7 or 8 times the cost. So whether it's your toy, your clothes, your electronics that are going on a boat from Asia to the US, these products are now costing more, not only because of their material and labor costs, but also because of the transportation costs that we are seeing from that. So with that, with that background, what are we looking at next? Where do we go from here? How do we get better? We see companies looking for a little bit different things, right? They're definitely more interested in different for suppliers, diversifying the factories involved, their sources, and even their countries, right? The risk of a fire, a flood, a freeze at any given factory are things they want to be reducing. But there's also the idea of the reducing country risk, right? And often that comes down these days to risk from China, whether it's because of tariffs or the threat of further trade war, other regulations. People are looking to diversify and often go say, can we build in China as well as in Vietnam, in China or in Mexico as well, or can we move? And so we see a lot more of that. There was some of this for sure before. Our factory in Vietnam has been growing tremendously because of some of that for some years. And it's not just a reaction to COVID. It's been a reaction to cost, a reaction to trade frictions, but COVID has also helped accelerate that. Again, this is a challenge because it requires efforts. It requires, there's cost associated with that, and so people are a little bit, they have to be careful about that. As I mentioned earlier, transportation times and costs when they were pretty steady were just something people baked in and to their total cost and didn't really factor that in as much in terms of decision making. But now with all the disruptions we've seen and the cost increases, people are looking at that more. There are more desires to build closer to the customer. In our case, build in the US, build in Mexico or other places in Latin America, because it's a lot easier to, put some products on a truck and get it across the Mexico-US border, and you can do that faster than getting it across the Pacific on a boat. So that becomes more of a consideration. what people are really looking at is what's the optimal combination onshore, namely in our case, building in the US, near shore, primarily Latin America, and offshore, which is heavily going to be Asia. How do you combine? Do you do some of your volume or some of your products in one place? Do you do some stages of production in one place and others closer to home, like the example I gave you from our North Carolina factory? There's a lot of different variables there, but people are exploring this and asking us about this more than they were before. The challenge still becomes cost. There's a reason people were buying from Asia and in particular China, and there's a cost advantage there. So the questions that come up were, if we move somewhere else, is there a cost increase? Often for us in Vietnam, that's not the case, but in Latin America, that can be the case. And what price premium companies are willing to pay to reduce their risk is something that varies by industry and by company. And the question still remains about inventory. We're definitely seeing people holding more inventory than they did before. They want to reduce that risk. Question is how much inventory and how long that stays. In a couple of years, our finance managers and upper company management again looking at the inventory numbers and trying to bring those down again. We'll have to see how long an effect these little challenges have on the future. So briefly, to just take a look at onshore, offshore, and nearshore manufacturing. Again, onshore is U.S., nearshore would be Latin America, very often Mexico, and offshore is Asia, very often China, but also growing Southeast Asia. We can see that, obviously the reason people go to offshore manufacturing is the cost, and that's the benefit. And again, that was the primary consideration earlier on. We look at other variables here, and quality, I would say this exaggerates the quality impact of offshore manufacturing. A lot of places offshore have gotten much better at this as they gained experience. We've worked with our suppliers in China. We certainly do not see that huge of an impact. You may see that in some industries. You may see that in some countries or locations where they don't have as much experience in particular industries. So there's some difference, but it's not as much as I would say on this slide. But there's risks, right? If we're building something in the United States, shipping to our company in the United States to provide to a customer in the United States, the international risks are minimized because you're in one country. Nearshore, you see some risks. There's currency risks, geopolitical risks. Your transportation time and cost risks go down though, because that's much less variable. Offshore, you have those same risks. Again, different currencies, different regulations by governments, threats of trade wars, but also the transportation time and transportation cost risks. As we've seen, both the amount of time it takes to get a product on a ship, the ship not being late, a container being available, getting it loaded, getting it across the ocean, then getting it unloaded. As we see, that time has gone up and now is more variable. And as we see the cost have gone up, that becomes a much greater risk. And so that's really, I think, one of the primary trade-offs we have when we are looking at these different aspects of manufacturing. So with these expectations, there's a lot of factors involved. And we're going to go through some of these here in this last slide here. So some of this is related to know-how. So you've got, areas of countries or specific countries where they've got a lot of experience building things. Just starting up somewhere else can be challenging. China, for example, for a lot of manufacturing, mechanical parts and electronics, they've been doing this for a couple of decades now. So they've got a well-trained, skilled workforce, your engineers, your technicians, your equipment support people, and they have schools who are graduating a good supply of people like that. You don't necessarily find that everywhere else. And that becomes a challenge if you're trying to move and operate in another location. You need the people to do that. And you can certainly bring some of those from another country. That can get expensive, and a long-term solution ideally is that the other country, develops that technical skilled workforce. But that's a challenge as we move. There's also infrastructure challenges. So I mean, it's great if you can find the workers, and it's great you want to move to another country. But what happens to the all the inputs? You need equipment, and you need people to be able to maintain and support that equipment. And sometimes this equipment can be very expensive. You're getting materials, your own supplies in. Maybe it's raw metal or plastic pellets or something like that. Where is that coming? And how does that particular geography look in terms of availability and cost of land, zoning requirements, and then other laws related to, what factories can do, what the labor laws are, what are the environmental regulations. That all plays into what we're looking at here. In some cases, it's just a question of capacity. I mean, there's volumes of products that would be very challenging for us to move, say, from China to US just based on the capacity at the factories that exist in the United States. So that plays in as well. If you expand and you want to go to multiple suppliers, you want to diversify your supply chain, you want to reduce your risk, there's costs associated with that. If you look at plastic injection molding, aluminum die casting, a number of other industries, there's expensive tooling that you need for this. And that's, a question of you've paid for that tooling at the first factory that you're working with. Do you want to pay that large cost at a second or even third factory? There's also the engineering time for qualifying and the time and cost involved in that. Not in the pharmaceutical industry, but I can imagine if they were going to qualify a new plant, that's probably a time-consuming and costly effort. Then there's the overall administrative cost of managing multiple suppliers, whether it's your quality teams, your supply chain teams, your finance teams. We go back to inventory, right? And the question is, where do you keep inventory? Do you keep it? Does your supplier keep it? Does their supplier keep it? Who pays who for keeping inventory? Who owns the inventory on their books, where it's a financial liability? When looking at metrics such as inventory terms or your cash conversion cycle, how quickly your cash flows from order to payment, and how you're paying your suppliers compared to how you are getting paid by your customers. How much inventory do you need where and at what level? Is it raw material, an intermediate stage, or is it at finished goods? And then another thing that's been growing in the last years, and not just since COVID, has been compliance. Sustainability, obviously, people see that a lot. And what's the effect from that, right? Is there a negative sustainability effort from putting something on a boat across the ocean? People looking at work conditions. We've probably all seen headlines for Apple and Foxconn and other examples overseas of what are work conditions like, and what do customers and companies in the U.S. expect the work conditions to be like. Not only a question of following local laws, but also following laws in the country of the customer, and the administration of costs efforts required to evaluate all of those things. But at the end, we still don't get away from the cost part, right? We have people who are still looking at cost, and that's obviously very important. And customers care about that. And customers don't really care how the product is made. They care that they can get it, and that they are and the price they would pay for it. And so that's still a primary consideration. As part of that, we've looked at some things. We've looked at some manufacturing, some things in Mexico where it works out well, and some where there's a significant pricing difference. And customers who are really excited to go there are less excited when there's a price difference like that. Another example would be in electronics. If you think about usually green circuit board. This is what all your electronic parts go on. You would look inside your cell phone or your computer or other electronics. We had a customer asking us to look at how we move our circuit boards away from China. This was because of trade war concerns and future risks. So we've explored that. We're still doing that, but to date we've been finding people in Southeast Asia who can do this, but the price is a lot higher. And a lot of that's because the raw materials are coming from China because that's where the industry is. The equipment's coming from China because that's where the industry is. So there's a lot of trade-offs people need to evaluate. There's no one right answer. It varies a lot by industry. It varies by company inside that industry. But hopefully I've given you some things to think about. Hopefully there's a little better understanding of some of the trade-offs and some of the things that we've seen in the past couple years and where we are going in the future. So I thank you very much for you listening in on this presentation, and happy to answer any of the questions that have come up.
Thank you, Stephen, for that excellent presentation. Very informative. It gives us a lot to think about. And I want to remind the audience to go ahead and submit your questions, either using the question and answer panel or through the chat. And actually, while I'm waiting for more questions to come in, I had a quick question for you, Stephen. I guess this is pretty general question, but I mean, because you touched on a lot of different topics, but I'm just curious about, improving your supply chain resiliency. What are some of the strategies that East-West Manufacturing has taken to improve their resiliency?
That's a great question. And so obviously that will vary. But for us, we've done a number of things. And obviously I've been living this for the last couple of years. Part of it's been diversifying the supply chain. So we as a company have acquired a number of factories in the United States and recently in Mexico, also in Costa Rica and Canada, which has added to our ability to manufacture not just in Asia, but also here in North America. So diversifying our own abilities to manufacture, but then also our supply chain. So we've taken a lot of effort to analyze the bills of materials, basically the list of parts that are used to make our products, and reviewed these and recommended to our customers adding additional, we call them off the shelf, so kind of repeatable sources where these are the same parts being made by different types of companies. So we've done a lot of work with that, and we're subject to our customers' approval for that, but we really encourage them to do that, and that's really a key aspect of that. It really broadens our supply chain opportunities when we are looking for materials in these difficult markets. We've engaged a lot with the executives at both distributors and manufacturers for parts to make sure we understand the situation, make sure they understand the situation, and to help us find parts. We've worked with some sources with the approval of our customers, places we don't normally get parts when our customers are open to it. Other companies in the industry and stuff that may have parts we need. We do that very carefully, only when our customers approve it, and we take a lot of it. We do a lot of inspections to reduce any risk associated with that. So we're looking at new sources. We're looking at alternate sources, and we're working with our customers on extending forecasts. We're asking for customers to give us forecasts into 2023 right now, so a year or more. But a couple years ago, if we had asked that, people would have looked at us like we were crazy. But now most of our customers are expecting that. They know that lead times for our products and the parts we need to buy are that long. And if they want to have a best shot at getting their products then they need to provide forecasts far longer out than they would have before.
Excellent, excellent. It seems like it's really a lot to do with mitigating risk. So, there's a few questions that have come in. There's a question here. Thanks for the excellent lecture. In your opinion, by percentage, how much extra cost should a manufacturer spend on disruption preparedness? Specifically, prepare for disruption events with different scales like the COVID-19 pandemic, the Suez Canal event, and port shipping crisis, respectively.
Hmm. Yeah, and of course, it's always going to be tough to predict any of these things, right? I don't know that anyone predicted COVID or Suez or any of the other things, and there'll be surprises later on. Uh, I don't think there's a hard number. I think part of that depends on in your industry, what's the impact to your revenue and to your customers if there's a disruption. What's how tight is your market, right? Different companies and markets have different margins. The more competitive markets tend to have really tight margins, and that obviously makes it more challenging to them to spend more money on these things. It's all about trade-offs. There's not a full one. Like I certainly wouldn't say go and spend 25, 50% more on it. That's hard to justify in your costs, and there's very few industries where companies can increase their costs that much and still remain competitive. So it's really needs to be in that context. But there's things you can do where you might end up adding, 5 or 10% cost, or you're adding 10, 15%, 20% inventory. Those may make sense for key parts, key products, and especially when they're in agreement with customers. I mean, a lot of it, especially in a B2B model, is working through with customers and saying what level of risk mitigation do you want, and what level of risk mitigation are you willing to pay for and have liability for. So I can't really give a good answer, but hopefully that gives you some general ideas.
Okay. Another question that we received here, given the challenges, time, and cost involved, do you really foresee a significant and radical shift to more on and nearshore supply chain solutions?
Yes, I do. I see more investigation of it than maybe execution in the end, but I still see there's going to be a number of that. We've got ourselves a number of customers who've been asking that. We know that that's occurring with others as well. And so, there's costs, but it's a question of, those initial costs versus later on costs and risks. And there's savings too, right? I mean, if you're saving on the cost and the time of product being on a boat, that's an inventory savings there. So we are going to see this. It's already occurring. It's been occurring as we see, some of the supply chain shift from China to Southeast Asia, I'd say over the last 5 or 10 years, as we're seeing some more of that, not to downplay the importance of and continued importance of China in the supply chain. And we've seen some go to Mexico as well and other places in Latin America, and we're still going to see that. It's probably not going to be as much as people initially envisioned. It's not going to be as cheap as people would like, but companies, and we are seeing this, companies are going to bite the bullet and pay more. It really just depends how much this costs and how much they're willing to put there at those costs to diversify their supply chain and reduce the risk.
Good. Next question. What is your outlook for chip shortages improving later this year into next year?
I wish I knew. I wish I had a stock of chips in my garage somewhere. So, yeah. So when I talk with the executives in, the distributors who supply the chips as well as with the manufacturers, the best we're getting is right now. The best guess is around Q4 that we'll see much of the supply chain loosen up. It doesn't mean it's going to go back to where it was, but it's going to be less constrained. Good expectation is that in Q3 we may see that for some things, not the most severely constrained right now, but some of those that are constrained and not at the extreme levels. That much of that will start to occur in Q4 and then into Q1 of 2023. Now, I need to caution you that this is not the first time these people have predicted that. They predicted it would end earlier as well. So this is just kind of the collective wisdom right now, and I'm hoping that it will be Q4 with some in Q3, but we will see what happens. There's a lot of factors involved, in what happens if what happens to the demand curve, what happens to any other supply shocks. So we'll see, but that's the best guess right now.
Okay, there's a few more questions still. Question by Paul Todd. I'm aware of the total cost of ownership model used by the reshoring initiative. Do you use something similar to measure the cost of supply chain changes versus the risks?
Well, we use total cost of ownership when we're evaluating where we buy our parts or materials from, and cost is a key component to that. Not just the material cost, but the logistical cost. So, your shipping costs, of course, your inventory costs. We also look at things like, support, lead times, and a whole bunch of different other things. When you're looking at deciding whether you want to be onshore, nearshore, or offshore, that's really where it comes into play. Because if you just look at cost, especially just at your direct material cost, not even looking at logistics, the answer is almost always going to be offshore. It's that total cost of ownership model when you look at the transportation costs, when you look at the risk, when you look at the lead times, when you look at the flexibility, the closeness to market. When you look at all those things, that's when total cost of ownership model really comes into play and really helps you make those decisions. And it really just depends on, what your company values and how you weigh different factors. And it can be done qualitatively, which we often do. Also can be done, there's ways to do it, I think, quantitatively, depending on what you're looking at.
Yes, sir. The next question is actually a series of questions, general questions. So I'll just go ahead and read them off, and I guess you can choose to answer all three or whatever you can answer. Do you have an update on the LB and LA ports? Number of ships inside, outside 40-mile zone, port operations, train and truck legs? That's question one. Then, do you have a multi-port strategy? Question two. And question three, any suggestions regarding cybersecurity?
Okay, some very different questions there. I will try to address them. So I don't have an update on the ports. I know it's not as bad as the photo that I showed you. Obviously, I showed you that photo for a reason, to show you, more of an extreme. I don't think it was the worst case, but I think it's gotten better. I think there's been more efforts to get more work hours from the different people involved at the port and in the logistics supporting the port, the warehouses, the trucking and stuff. At one point, they were all pointing fingers at each other, right? People were saying they can't unload it fast enough. The people at the port were saying, well, we can unload it. We have no place to move it because there's no truckers or there's no warehouse space or workers for that. So I think that's gotten better. I don't know that it's back to that 2019 photo, but I don't see that as critical as it was before. We do have a multi-port strategy for our products that come into the United States. First of all, we have a factory in Costa Rica, so we have some parts that go in there. We have a warehouse here in the Atlanta area. Many of our products come into the port of Savannah, which has had less issues than you were seeing in the West Coast. We do have stuff going on the West Coast, as we do have a warehouse there to support our customers kind of in the western half of the United States. As you can imagine, sending product by boat to Savannah and then transporting it by land back to the West Coast or something like that is not the most efficient. So we are doing that. Cybersecurity, yeah. That's another risk, right? That's a risk, and you can shut down, logistics. You can shut down even factories if you have a cybersecurity event. So it's another risk. didn't put that up as a photo earlier, but it's something that could impact the supply chain, especially if it's done on a wide enough scale. So it's really critical that that those systems, are protected, and that you have things in the factory that if they don't need to be connected outside, that they're isolated, or that you're putting in place the right cybersecurity measures. There's often things, shop floor control, equipment programming, things like that, which are inside a factory that don't necessarily need to be, connected to the wider internet, and you can reduce that risk. Especially the more people you have who are accessing, things online, whether it's a spam email or something like that, some other phishing attempt, the more chance you have of there being an issue. In the supply chain, obviously there's a lot of communication that needs to go on, either it's data or emails between supply chain partners, and it's a risk. And it's something that people need to be aware of and trained. Companies need to put in place the right IT systems to reduce that risk. We're not going to eliminate that. But again, like the other risks we talk about, it's a question of how much money and effort you're willing to put in. And there have been enough high-profile cybersecurity attacks that I see companies are putting more of their resources into that, expanding their IT efforts in that.
Excellent question and answer there. Actually, it's a good segue to just mention that our next seminar actually is on cyber supply chain risk management. So that's going to be given by Don Davidson. Actually, is a former Georgia Tech GTRI employee, but now he works at Synopsys as the director of cyber SCRM programs. So he's going to be our next speaker next week. So I think it's a good follow up, as we'll still be on this supply chain topic.
Good.
Couple more questions, but I know there's only a few minutes left, so maybe we can get at least one of these. Other than cost, are there any major obstacles for a manufacturer to improve supply chain resilience?
Yeah, I'll call them more challenges instead of obstacles, but there's the cost, there's the effort, and the resources that you need to put into it. Now, a lot of companies are very lean. Of course, we've all heard about struggles to find personnel, so you don't just decide you're going to a new factory or country and place a purchase order and go usually. For most things, if you're buying some screws, that might be okay. For a lot of things, there's an effort required from multiple departments. Finding and prioritizing that work effort is a challenge. Evaluating, who's the right supplier and who's the right company and the right country. Where's the right place to do things? Just because country X is great for electronics manufacturing doesn't mean it's good for plastics or for metals. And just because an area or a country is good for electronics doesn't mean any supplier there is the one you want to use. So you've got the risks and challenges of choosing the right supplier who can help you as you need, who can be responsive, can be flexible beyond just the region and the efforts involved in that.
Excellent. Final question here. This global shortage is cyclical, seasonal issues, which is exasperated with the pandemic. Do you think that the industry will have short memory again on this global shortage experience?
I think to some extent, yes. I think we will get, I don't know how many years, it's 2, 3, 5 years. And yeah, people will kind of forget some of this. And again, we'll focus more on some of the financial metrics, the cash flow and the inventory, the work of managing multiple suppliers. So I think in the near term, it's very hard to forget, especially while it's still going on. People are going to be prioritizing these efforts. I think, we've been through this before. We've been through shortages before, not to this extent, not to this breadth. And we will, in the end, I think we will see that there is, more diversification of supply that comes out of this, even medium to long term, but probably not as much as people might be talking about at this stage. There will be people, again, reverting back to some of the previous models, especially when during a normal supply chain situation, they work well for them. It's hard to argue with some of those those people advocating for, reducing your costs and your inventory at the expense of risk mitigation, because people aren't always thinking about risk as much as maybe they should be.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's probably, okay, right, to fluctuate
Yeah.
based on, what's happening, in the supply chain. So once it goes back to a shortage, then, you'll have maybe some strategies in place some lessons learned that could be implemented, once you go
Hopefully
back
it
to it.
will there'll be some yeah hopefully there'll be some learnings that are kept in place, and I think there will be. It's a question of how much, and how much we can do that instead of just be reactive.
Excellent, excellent. All right. Well, this is great. We're actually out of time, Stephen. I just had thought about one other question though. I don't know if you have a
Yeah,
couple minutes because
sure.
I thought it might be important for some of the students that have joined, because I know you're an alumni of Georgia Tech, and I think I just mentioned acronyms when I was introducing you, but you have a bachelor's and a master's in engineering, as well as an MBA from Georgia Tech. So wow, three degrees, 3 degrees. Sorry, your bachelor's is MIT. Sorry, your
Yeah,
master's and
don't
MBA.
hold that against me.
Your master's and MBA from Georgia Tech. But anyway, being an engineer, and going through undergrad and graduate school, I was just curious about your transition to now being a global supply chain leader in industry. How was that transition?
Yeah, it's a great question. What I found is a lot of my engineering classmates from both schools have ended up, especially later in their careers, doing things that are not directly related to the major they studied in, and that the engineering degrees really provide a good fundamental basis for the students when they graduate to have the problem solving and work skills that are needed by a wide range of industries, by people who are doing consulting or financial jobs, or in my case, supply chain. I did not plan on becoming a supply chain person. When I was at Georgia Tech, if you'd asked me about that, I would not have envisioned that. I kind of went from mechanical engineering into a more manufacturing focus with my jobs. And then in those jobs, I started getting more involved in the supplier aspects and working with the supply chain and the suppliers, and found that I preferred that, and found that I could do that well. And certainly that I think I could do that better than, designing mechanical parts. And so I really just transitioned slowly. And there was no grand plan, afraid to say. But it all goes to the point that you've got a lot of options with the skills that you're getting and that you're learning, especially if you kind of keep up on things. If you keep learning, and you keep growing, and getting the certifications that are appropriate for what you're doing or what you want to do. You can then use that engineering background and any future degrees, if you choose, for a wide range of different types of careers.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Stephen, for spending a little bit of extra time with us and giving a wonderful lecture. We're definitely going to keep in touch with you. I see that you have your contact information on the slide for anybody who has additional questions after this event is over. And again, I think I mentioned the next speaker. We're still going to be on the supply chain topic and talking more about cybersecurity next week. So stay tuned for that. And I hope there will be a recording that will be posted on a link on our website for this session as well. If you want to watch it again, check back in a few days on our website. So with that said, again, thank you, Stephen. Thank you to our audience. And everybody have a wonderful Monday.
Thank you, Billy D.